Mongo Beti's The Poor Christ of Bomba, Le Pauvre Christ de Bomba, originally published in French in 1956 and later translated into English in 1971, is one of the most compelling satirical novels to emerge from post-colonial African literature. Set in French Cameroon during the 1930s, the novel critiques the colonial missionary enterprise through the eyes of a naive teenage boy, Dennis, who accompanies a Catholic priest on a religious tour. The novel not only examines the contradictions of religious missions under colonialism but also reveals the tensions between traditional African culture and imposed European values. With sharp irony, Beti interrogates the colonial civilizing mission, religious hypocrisy, and the disintegration of indigenous identities. This fictional yet strikingly realistic portrayal of colonial life is both humorous and tragic, serving as an enduring critique of Western intervention in Africa. Setting and context. Set in the small mission town of Bomba in southern Cameroon, the novel takes place in 1938 under French colonial rule. The story is narrated by Dennis, a 15-year-old African boy who serves as the houseboy and personal assistant to Father Superior Drummond, a white Catholic missionary. The novel unfolds through Dennis's journal-like narration, blending innocence with subtle irony. The journey begins. Father Drummond, who has spent years trying to convert the villagers to Catholicism and impose Western customs, decides to embark on a tour of the surrounding villages to reinforce Christian teachings and check on the progress of his mission. He is accompanied by Dennis and Raphael, a Christianized African assistant who enforces church rules and mediates between Father Drummond and the villagers. Their journey takes them through various villages, Asik, Nkol Nadoam, Mekwele, and others, where Father Drummond preaches, performs baptisms, excommunicates sinners, and berates the converts for continuing to practice traditional customs. Along the way, Dennis records the priest's actions, the villagers' responses, and his own growing confusion and awakening. Moral conflicts and hypocrisy. Father Drummond is presented as a man of strong faith and moral rigor, but his arrogance and lack of cultural sensitivity become increasingly evident. He refuses to understand local customs and equates Christianity with European civilization. He condemns polygamy, traditional medicine, and indigenous beliefs as sinful, yet fails to realize the cultural violence of his own mission. Meanwhile, Raphael serves as a symbol of African complicity in colonial rule. Though African himself, he acts as an enforcer of white supremacy, punishing other Africans who resist conversion. Dennis, caught between his admiration for the priest and his observations of the villagers' secret resistance, begins to question the legitimacy of the missionary work. The villagers outwardly conform to Christianity but secretly maintain their traditions and resent the missionaries' interference. A shocking revelation. The central conflict of the novel comes to a head when Father Drummond learns that his favorite convert, Catherine, a young woman he once raised as a symbol of Christian virtue, is pregnant. Likely by Raphael, the very man tasked with upholding the mission's morality. The revelation devastates Drummond and undermines his belief in the purity of his work. He excommunicates Catherine and withdraws from public ministry in despair. This moment is not just a personal betrayal but symbolic of the failure of the entire missionary project. The people have not truly converted, they have only learned to wear masks. The return and collapse. Returning to Bomba, Father Drummond becomes more withdrawn. Dennis, having witnessed the contradictions and hypocrisies of the mission, begins to mature. The novel ends ambiguously, with the mission seemingly continuing on the surface, but with its ideological foundation shaken. The Christ brought to Bomba has been poor indeed, stripped of spiritual meaning, used as a colonial tool, and ultimately rejected by the people. Character analysis. Dennis. As the narrator, Dennis offers a unique perspective. His youth and naivety create a humorous tone, but his observations become more critical as the story unfolds. Through Dennis, Beti presents the process of political and psychological awakening. Dennis starts as a loyal servant but becomes a witness to the moral collapse of the mission, recognizing the hypocrisy of both Europeans and Christianized Africans. His internal conflict reflects the broader identity crisis facing colonized Africans. Father Drummond. A complex character, Father Drummond is both sincere and tragically flawed. He genuinely believes in his mission and wants to uplift the African people, but he is blinded by cultural arrogance and religious dogma. His failure to acknowledge indigenous values and his rigid morality alienate the very people he hopes to save. His ultimate breakdown illustrates the futility of imposing foreign beliefs through force and coercion. Raphael. Raphael represents the evolved African, educated in the Western tradition, but corrupted by power. His authoritarian enforcement of mission rules and his affair with Catherine highlight the contradictions within the Christianized elite. Raphael's character critiques the African collaborators who perpetuate colonial ideologies for personal gain. Catherine. Catherine, raised as a model convert, becomes the tragic symbol of the mission's failure. Her pregnancy exposes the superficiality of imposed morality. Rather than being a case of individual weakness, her fall reveals the deep-rooted resistance to colonial repression and the impossibility of severing people from their cultural roots through doctrine alone. Themes. 1. Satire of the missionary enterprise. Beti uses biting satire to expose the contradictions in the missionary effort. Father Drummond's tour is portrayed as a farce, with villagers pretending to accept Christianity while secretly clinging to their traditions. The novel mocks the arrogance of missionaries who believe that spiritual salvation can be delivered through colonial power. 2. Hypocrisy and double standards. The novel abounds in examples of moral hypocrisy. Raphael punishes others for sins he commits himself. Father Drummond preaches compassion but excommunicates sinners without empathy. The Christian mission, supposedly founded on love, is portrayed as an instrument of control, humiliation, and cultural erasure. 3. Cultural imperialism. The missionaries equate African customs with sin and ignorance, attempting to replace them with European norms. The novel highlights the violence of this cultural imposition. Christianity, as practiced in Bomba, becomes a vehicle for colonial domination, denying Africans their identity and autonomy. 4. Resistance and agency. Despite the power of the missionaries, the villagers resist in subtle and clever ways. They pretend to conform while continuing their traditions in secret. Beti shows that African cultures were not passively erased, rather, they endured through quiet defiance. 5. Coming of age and awakening. Dennis's transformation from a naive boy to a critical observer mirrors the journey of post-colonial awareness. His evolving understanding represents the awakening of a new generation of Africans, questioning the legitimacy of colonial narratives and seeking to reclaim their history. Narrative style and technique. Mongo Beti's choice of narrator is central to the novel's effectiveness. Dennis's childlike tone creates a humorous contrast with the gravity of the subject matter. His innocent observations often expose deeper truths that an adult might miss. This unreliable but insightful narration adds layers of irony, making the satire more poignant. The novel's episodic structure, centered on the journey, allows Beti to showcase different facets of missionary activity and African response. Through dialogue, internal monologue, and anecdotal encounters, Beti paints a vivid picture of colonial Cameroon. Symbolism. The tour. The journey symbolizes the missionaries' attempt to spread control and assert religious dominance. However, it becomes a journey of disillusionment. Catherine's pregnancy, a metaphor for the collapse of moral pretension and the failure of spiritual colonization. The cross, traditionally a symbol of salvation, here it becomes an emblem of suffering, coercion, and hypocrisy. Significance and legacy. The Poor Christ of Bomba is not just a critique of missionary failure. It is a bold rejection of the entire colonial ideology that justified domination through religion. When first published, the novel was controversial and even banned in parts of Africa and France. Today, it is considered a classic of African literature and a foundational text in post-colonial studies. Beti's fearless satire and his insistence on exposing the complicity of African collaborators and the failure of imported religion make this novel essential reading for anyone interested in the dynamics of power, faith, and identity under colonial rule. Conclusion. Mongo Beti's The Poor Christ of Bomba is a brilliant satire that dissects the colonial missionary enterprise with sharp wit and profound insight. Through the eyes of Dennis, the novel unveils the contradictions, hypocrisies, and failures of both European missionaries and African collaborators. Its humor does not diminish its seriousness; instead, it amplifies its critique of spiritual imperialism and cultural domination. In an age when the legacies of colonialism continue to shape global realities, Beti's work remains a powerful call for cultural dignity, self-awareness, and true liberation.